Hi, I'm Sad Bintax, and I want to help you find the right sensitivity for you in Rainbow Six Siege. There's already a ton of these videos out there right now, and they all seem to go over the same information. What the settings mean, how to get a one-to-one sense between hipfire and ADS, and more recently, how to convert your sense back to the way it was before the Shadow Legacy update. But I still see a ton of comments on Reddit and YouTube from people saying they can't seem to find the right sense, and things just haven't felt right since the Shadow Legacy update. So I want to talk about some of the methods for actually finding the right sense and how to test yourself to be sure. So like I said, there's already a bunch of videos that talk about the settings and what they mean, so I'm only going to gloss over that information quickly and focus more on the meta of tuning your mouse sensitivity. Basically, pre-Shadow Legacy calculated your sense with something called the 360 distance, and now it's calculated with something called the visual motor gain. The short and simple explanation is that mouse sensitivity is now calculated differently, and you can now set a sensitivity for each level of magnification on your gun sight. According to Ubisoft's explanation, the basic settings will set all ADS sense to 50, which is supposed to feel consistent across all sights. However, this doesn't seem to be accurate. With the basic setting, your crosshair moves slower and slower with more magnification, and it doesn't feel consistent across all sights. If you like this, that's fine, but if you don't, you're going to need to use advanced settings. If you know your old pre-Shadow Legacy sense, you can punch in the numbers to a converter, I'll link several in the description, to get something much closer to what I think most of us would call 1-to-1. Now, before I go into techniques to help you find the right sense for you, it would help to figure out what your priorities are. For example, my priorities are to have surgical precision and buttery smooth movement with my crosshair. For me, the smoother my movement is, the easier it is to see and aim the crosshair exactly where I want it. So for me, that puts me at a low sense, but it does have its shortcomings. So to figure out your priorities, let's first figure out the pros and cons of high and low sense. The higher your sensitivity, the faster your flicks will be, but movement will be much twitchier and it will become more difficult to be precise. You can try this out. Start a custom game and pick a small, faraway target. Face away from it and do a 180 and try to aim at the very center of that target. With a high sensitivity, you may have a faster overall flick, but if it's inaccurate or takes an extra couple of seconds for you to actually center your crosshair on the target, then having a faster flick might be a moot point. Let me quickly talk about recoil control. It can be easier to counter recoil with a higher sensitivity because it requires less hand movement to counter muzzle climb. With a lower sensitivity, you have to pull your hand down more to keep the crosshair centered. Okay, here's a big one that doesn't ever really get talked about, but it's kind of a big deal. Target size changes with a higher or lower sensitivity. Basically what this means is if you were to visualize the target as an image on your mouse pad, it would grow as you decrease sensitivity and shrink as you increase it. Here's an example. As I increase horizontal sensitivity, the target becomes more and more narrow on the mouse pad, and as I increase vertical sensitivity, the target becomes shorter until my overall target is smaller. With this smaller target, it becomes easier to miss, and it now takes less movement in any direction to get off target. However, as I decrease horizontal and vertical sensitivity, the target gets wider and taller until my overall target is larger on the mouse pad, making it easier to hit and track. Now the same amount of movement as before actually stays on target. Okay, so now you know some pros and cons and you can start tuning your settings to fit your priorities. One technique is to test your tracking and crosshair placement. Pick a target like the one I'm using here on Oregon and move left to right trying to keep your crosshair centered on the target. If you're struggling to keep it centered, you may need to reduce or increase your sensitivity. Also try moving through the map like you would in a real game, keeping your crosshair aimed at important spots as you move. You should be able to crouch, stand, and move as much as you want while keeping your crosshair right where you want it. If your crosshair is all over the place and you're struggling to keep it right where you want it as you move, then you may need to play with your sense until crosshair placement is much easier for you. Another technique is to test your flicking in 180. Pick two targets that aren't too far away from each other and try flicking between them. Don't be too nitpicky with this one, but if you're way overshooting or way undershooting, you should play with your sense until you can do this fairly reliably. Another thing to test is see if you can pull a 180 reliably. Don't bother ADSing, just face in a direction and see if you can pull a 180. You should be able to whip around and face the other way, doing as close to a perfect 180 as you can. If you're way over or way under, you may need to tweak your sense again. Now do all of these techniques one after the other, making adjustments as needed to get your sensitivity where you want it. Ultimately, you may have to make some compromises. Your flicks might be just where you want them, but this could make tracking and crosshair placement more difficult and vice versa. For example, when I first started playing, my sense was at 41 and my flicks were pretty nasty, but my precision suffered. My priorities were to have smooth crosshair placement and precision, so now I play with a sense at 6, which is pretty low. I had to compromise, but over time my flicks came back to me naturally. A quick note, you should definitely check your mouse settings in Windows and turn off Enhanced Pointer Precision. Leave the pointer speed at default settings, which should be 6 out of 11. Next, you should check your mouse's DPI settings. I would recommend setting your DPI between 400 and 800, as anything higher would be really fast, but the choice is yours. Polling rate should be set to 1000. The polling rate is how often your mouse reports movements to your computer. I'll leave links in the description that better explain these settings. If any of these things were off, you may want to go back and retry the techniques I showed you earlier, because the Windows and mouse software settings can throw off your in-game settings. Anyway, that's all I've got, and I hope it was helpful. If you did find it helpful, a like and subscribe would mean a lot. Thanks for watching.
Spotted.
Ooh, he's not going to be happy about that.